What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Archaeo Animals, the podcast all about zooarchaeology. I'm your host, Alex Fitzpatrick, and with me, as always,
Simona Falanga.
See, now I'm like trying to do the ASMR thing, but I can't because I'm a New Yorker and I'm too loud. Maybe we'll do that for an episode. We'll do an entirely ASMR episode, you know?
Like the bone whisperers?
Yeah, just bang a bone, just bang the bone on the mic. Anyway, today's episode, we are returning. Not really returning. We've been doing this series this whole time, but we are doing another episode in our mini-series that we've called Where in the World, which is letting us finally break out of our British shells and enter other parts of the world to take a look at the zooarchaeology there. And we're going continent by continent for ease. So a lot of space to cover, but we'll try to do our best. And today we'll be looking at Asia.
Yeah, so roughly, as for the other episodes, the way it's going to work, so we'll cover some of the wild species that are prevalent sort of in this region, and then we'll focus on the domesticates. And finally, what is allegedly your favourite, the case studies.
Our so-called favorite part of the episode. But I think it's a good part of the episode. So
I think we can't take a hint, because we've said it so many times. You would have thought that someone would have reinforced that on social media, going, yes, it is our favourite part of the episode. But it's been very quiet, so I think we just can't take a hint.
It's called manifesting, Simona. We're manifesting it into reality. Anyway, we will, as Simona said, start with the wild species that are native to this region of the world. And we'll start with the tiger. And as always, Simona will be doing the Latin because I cannot.
Panthera tigris.
Thank you. Thank you. And although historically the tiger was distributed throughout Asia, today it is mostly found in the Southeast and Northeast Asia. And interestingly, and this is something I didn't know until we started doing the research for this episode, I didn't realize that the topic of tiger subspecies was such a huge site of debate among geneticists. I guess that's not really our lane. But yeah, there seems to be a general lack of consensus as to how many actually exist, which is... I mean, to be fair, I don't think I could tell you how many subspecies there were for most animals off the top of my head. So It's not really a thing you can easily see by bone, is it?
No, probably just something at the genetic level. And also, if you realize, put it into perspective, I mean, there's so many subspecies, but because, originally they had such a wide range, I mean, it's a big continent.
Pretty big.
Would see a lot of variation there, but probably at a genetic level, mostly not in terms of sort of skeletal remains.
Yeah, so it's not really something we personally get to cover, although again, I assume you could see it through, say, aDNA work, things like that. And obviously, as aDNA work becomes more commonplace, I'm sure that there'll be some sites where zooarchaeologically they'll get down to the subspecies, which is pretty cool, to be honest. So it's been a massive debate among geneticists and biologists as to how many subspecies there are among tigers, but genome sequencing in 2018 may have finally narrowed down the actual number to around 6 subspecies. And for once, I won't make Simona read all the Latin names because there's tons of Latin names for her to read in this episode. But just to list the common ones, you have the Bengal tiger, the Amur tiger, the South China tiger, the Sumatran tiger, the Indo-Chinese tiger, and the Malayan tiger. Speaking of tigers, my cat is now staring at me, and she's leaving because she's bored of this podcast. So
she's the only real tiger.
She's the only real tiger has left. No, she's just sat behind me, so it's fine. We do have a tiger in our midst for this episode. Anyway, tigers have held a cultural importance throughout the Asian continent, both in the past and also in the present. Remains have historically been used as amulets and as medicine, particularly in Chinese traditional medicine, which is, I think a lot of people think of Chinese traditional medicine as mostly plants and herbs, and it definitely is, but Chinese traditional medicine also uses a lot of animal parts and also things like stones and metals. It's a very big kind of field that I'm obviously very interested in. But yeah, tiger remains have been used as medicine in Chinese traditional medicine, but I believe laws have now made that a lot more difficult, unsurprisingly. And speaking of China, tigers are also the third animal in the Chinese zodiac. They represent the earth element. And it's not just China, though. In Korea, the tiger is seen as a guardian against evil. And this is where we have to shoehorn one of our favorites. So get that bingo card out. Guess who would import tigers?
The Phoenicians.
Oh. No, don't be silly, Simona. It's the Romans. They would import tigers as part of their menageries and combat theater. Duh.
Think of that. Oh.
I mean, who else?
But yes, you do find tigers being depicted on Roman mosaics, of course, for a lot of the combat theatre scenes, or even sort of scenes of tigers or similar sort of wild animals being sort of corralled from the wild Romans.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you wouldn't be wrong for the most part if you see any kind of non-European animal and you're like, the Romans probably took that back with them, right? Like, I feel like there's a smaller list of species they didn't take back.
So the ones that they didn't voluntarily take, they took with them by mistake.
True, and we have a whole episode about that kind of straggler animals, and you can find that in our backlog. But have we finally reached Roman exhaustion?
Oh, you say that.
It's true. That's just tempting you at this point. I'm looking forward to finding out how we get Romans into our episode on Australia.
Oh, we'll find a way.
That's true. Anyway, we'll move on to our next species, the giant panda.
Yes, find any research to see if the Romans grabbed any of those from the wild. The giant panda, Ailuropoda melanoleuca, is primarily found in China, and you have sort of 2 subspecies. The Ailuropoda melanoleuca, just stress it twice, which is, your typical black and white giant panda that usually, it tends to be more in people's imagination. And the kinling panda, the Ailuropoda melanoleuca kinligensis. I hope you wrote that down. And this other subspecies is light brown and white in colour. Now, prior to the 19th century, the giant panda was classified in Chinese as mo. However, this was also the name for a mythical creature that had the trunk of an elephant, the feet of a tiger, the eyes of a rhino, and the tail of a cow. I'm trying to picture that.
Well, I mean, you don't really have to imagine it, because the reason why there's some confusion is some French expert made the mistake of thinking that moa referred to a tapir, which is basically what they look like. So,
trunk of an elephant, feet of a tiger, eyes of a rhino. Yeah, that's a tapir. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, actually,
really.
if people do want to look it up, it's spelled M-O phonetically. It does look like you kind of can't blame them because it does look like a tapir.
Oh, okay. But I mean, obviously, this has had a knockdown effect on archaeological interpretations of material culture depicting the Mao, the mythical creature, causing archaeologists to infer that the tapir potentially have held a much higher sort of symbolic importance that it actually had. As, of course, the iconography of the mythical creature was used to repel evil. So...
yeah, anyway, giant pandas remain the icon of China, and they're cool, and they're not tapirs, so jot that down.
Have we learned anything today? Yes, pandas are not tapirs.
To be fair, and I can't believe I'm making this kind of giving them the leeway, but for people who don't know, Chinese language can be very difficult because you can have the same word, and then depending on the way you use the tones, it could mean like 6 different things. So it's not surprising to me that there was this kind of weird mix-up with the Ma. And to be honest, as some listeners may know, I am Chinese American, so I do know some Chinese, but I am most likely doing the tones wrong in this episode. So apologies to any Chinese speakers who are going, oh my gosh, the tones are wrong. She has no idea what she's saying. She's saying something completely different. Apologies for that. But yeah, so...
I just found a photo. You know, it to be fair...
it does look like it. It looks so much like it. Like, you can't really fault them. If I looked at that, I'd be like, that's a tapir. And if you look back at some of the archaeological kind of depictions of what people thought were tapirs and were actually the Ma, you would also think that. So, I mean, I think it's only something that's kind of within the last couple of decades has really had a real evaluation. But it's interesting, for sure. So pandas, not tapirs. Very important lesson. Anyway, I think we should get to our last wild species, which is the Asian elephant.
The Elephas maximus.
Now, we have covered the African elephant previously, so there's not that much different to really talk about, at least, biologically, anatomically. The Asian elephant is spread throughout South and Southeast Asia and has 3 subspecies.
Okay.
Here we go.
The Elephas maximus, so like the big, which is the Sri Lankan elephant. Elephas maximus indicus, which is the mainland Asian elephant. And Elephas maximus sumatranus, the Sumatran elephant.
Good job. I'm always impressed by your ability. I mean, it makes sense. I know that you are Italian, so it's not that difficult, but that is extremely difficult for me. And I took four terms of Latin, so good job.
I just read it with an Italian accent.
I mean, it's a good tip for people who are trying to speak Latin. Any high school or college students out there who are taking Latin right now, take Simona's advice. If you don't remember how to pronounce something, just do it in an Italian accent. You'll probably make your way through.
I'm getting really horrible scenes now.
Anyway, so getting back to the elephant. During the Mesolithic, meat was likely scavenged from fallen elephants, with actual elephant hunts probably being rare given, it's a bit difficult, I think, to hunt an elephant, particularly with kind of low grade or, not as sophisticated weaponry. So understandable, I feel like.
It's a high risk, a high gain, but also very high risk. Because I think one of them sort of touches you ever so slightly, you're pretty much done for, probably.
True. This is extremely true. Now, during the Neolithic, elephant remains, particularly the ivory from its tusks, would become much more prevalent in archaeological contexts as worked artifacts. Elephants would become, unsurprisingly, a very important part of cultural iconography, particularly in Harappan material culture, which we will talk about later. Spoiler alert. And in places like Kerala, India, the elephant is actually a central component to local rituals and festivals, having been historically woven into local legends and lore, to the point that I think there's like 700 elephants that are owned by either organizations or individuals in Kerala. So big importance on elephants there. And I think that's kind of going to be the running theme this episode. Not elephants, but the kind of running theme of iconography and cultural importance that exists today. And I think we've touched upon this in previous episodes, but it is interesting to see how far some of this iconography lasts and how much we still have these kind of associations with certain species that are actually thousands of years old. You know, like how we all mistake the tapir for a panda.
It makes me wonder particularly about a lot of the, the interpretations we have, like of representations of animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess.
Sorry, I don't know what I'm saying.
No, I think if I'm understanding what you're about to say, if I'm reading your mind correctly across time and space, I feel like it could be a tricky thing in it's almost chicken and egg. Do we make this interpretation because we already think this way about said animal, or is this more of a interpretation that has like contextual evidence? That makes sense. The blue
Similarly, but not related at all. I want to know what's the deal with the cats riding the snails in illuminated manuscripts.
Again, that's, a very common cultural thing that exists to this day. All those snails being ridden by cats.
Because I feel like that would have been a beautiful sort of folklore legend that's been lost to time, and now it's just memes.
Yeah, now it's just on that weird medieval guy's Twitter, which makes me laugh every single time I see it. And I think as we ponder these very deep questions as to whether or not cats riding snails has deeper cultural connotations, I think we will take a break and we'll come back and talk a bit more about domesticates, all those really different domesticated species. And it's definitely not going to be very similar to the last couple episodes.
And it's definitely not going to be just various iterations of cattle.
Oh, no.
No.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
And we are back with Archaeoanimals, the podcast all about zooarchaeology, and we are talking about the zooarchaeology of Asia today as part of our Where in the World mini-series. And now we'll be looking at the domesticated species from this region that definitely won't be just several different species of cattle at all.
Well, so some are slightly, furrier than others.
Yeah, okay. I'll be honest, folks. We did talk about this in a previous episode, I think, but domesticated species kind of similar throughout the world, and obviously you do get different species, but unsurprisingly, we all have very similar needs, and so very similar types of species were domesticated. So,
so I guess we tried to go for domesticated species that are not quite what we'd find sort of across the board. So like moving aside from our chickens and our sheep and so forth.
Although we obviously do cover those in various different species. And I think that's been one of the kind of interesting things about this miniseries is seeing how, even though we have every place kind of seems to have their own cattle, their own sheep, their own chicken, really something adjacent to that. There are slight differences that are very, regional specific, culturally specific. So constants and variables, I guess, which is interesting.
Because I guess that's a not cattle that I find they're quite interesting. Like one, not quite species, but various breeds of a given species are sort of all the sort of imperial Chinese chicken breeds. That are mainly, they're kept throughout the world now, but mainly sort of as ornamental chickens because for laying eggs, they're really not good. But there's some beautiful breeds of birds.
Yes, definitely. And we love our duck in China. Could have done duck too. Talk about that century egg, which is still very gross to me. Apologies to my Chinese family members. I don't get it. Anyway, we won't be talking about ducks or birds at all. Sorry, did you have something to say?
No, we'll be talking about big ungulates instead.
Yeah, very much not birds, really. So we will start with the water buffalo.
Bubalus bubalis. I think it's a very cute scientific name. Bubalus bubalis.
Oh, it's so cute. I love that name so much. So originally from South and Southeast Asia, they are actually found throughout Europe, which I actually didn't know. And like many of these species, there are different types. So there are two distinct types of water buffalo. So there's the river buffalo, which is found mainly in India, and the swamp buffalo, which is found in Southeast and Eastern Asia.
Yeah, about the water buffalo being found in Europe. So normally when you do find sort of buffalo meat, it does tend to be water buffalo.
Oh, I didn't know that. Interesting. Huh. Wonder why.
I don't know. Easy to keep? I don't know.
So the modern day water buffalo is domesticated. There is, unsurprisingly, again, another theme in these episodes, there's some debate as to where the water buffalo was actually domesticated. And it's originally been assumed that it was domesticated in China, but more recent, or at least within the past decade, there's been genetic research that has suggested otherwise. And one of the things about this, we were talking about how there's only so many species that can get domesticated. But one of the things we'll find in this episode with kind of all the different cattle we'll be talking about is that Asia, and to be honest, China as well, being as big as of a continent it is, it's very vast and varied when it comes to the types of environments that you deal with. So a lot of these domesticated cattle are domesticated because of the very specific adaptations and characteristics that make it useful for the certain area they're in. So with water buffalo, per se, they're suited to working in paddy fields because of the wet and muddy environment, and is also used as a pack animal. So that is exactly why you want a water buffalo and not necessarily, say, your everyday bos tapirs. And it's so if you think or you look at images of, say, rural China, these are the kind of domesticates you'll find in paddies. And it's also, as well as being used as a pack animal and as a beast of burden, is also used for dairying, for meat, which is known as cow beef, and their horns, which they do have very distinctive horns. They're used in traditional instruments such as the kaval of the Balkans and Anatolia, and the ney of the Middle East.
Next is another favorite as far as scientific names go. There's the domestic yak, Bos grunieds, which is literally the grunting ox, or the hairy cattle, for obvious reasons if you look up a photo. The yak is found primarily in the Himalayas and Northeast Asia, and the domesticated species that we have now descends from the wild yak, obviously. Bos mutus, which again sort of makes me chortle, because bos mutus, it makes me like mutus, makes me think of mute, like the mute ox, as opposed to when it got domesticated and it started grunting.
Because it's doing all that work.
I mean, I would if I'm just like wild, just like running free, and then like, oh no, like be a beast of burden, work here, and then just grunting all the time. Basically, yak are useful as pack animals, and they provide meat as well as secondary products in the form of wool and dairy. The butter made from their milk is arguably quite famously part of Tibetan tea. For parts of the Himalayas without trees, their dung is also quite vital as a fuel resource. The importance of the animal sort of in general to the inhabitants of Tibet can be seen in material culture as well. So with iconography, again, another one of the running themes, found in sculpture and pottery, as well as remains left in context of note.
Yeah, the thing about using the dung as fuel, that's one other thing that I just generally never really thought about, which is, oh, there's a lack of trees in the Himalayas, huh? Like, yeah.
Best use something else. If only there were a big ox that's grunting all the time.
As well as I feel like I had to put a note to mention the Tibetan tea, because when I was a kid and was really getting interested in, world cultures and anthropology and things like that, I remember reading about Tibetan tea, which is basically just tea, and they would put yak butter in it. And I was so obsessed with that concept, and I still am, and I'm very curious. I would love to have it one day, because it's fascinating to me. Like, I want to know what that tastes like.
Oh, just looking at yaks all with the little saddles. Oh, they look so cute.
They're so cute. They are so adorable. But yeah, they're extremely important to the inhabitants of Tibet, and is just so seen in so much of the iconography there, and they're very cute, so why not? Why wouldn't you put it there? I mean, come on, I get it. And again, they're also just so important because of, let's be real, it's extremely cold up there, huh? So having such a resource for thick wool, as well as very calorie heavy dairy that could be used to keep you fueled and warm up there. Again, it's that kind of example of a species domesticated for very specific reasons. And I guess we'll go to our next cattle, going away from the Himalayas and a bit down further to the Bali cattle.
Bos javanicus domesticus.
So it is a domesticated descendant of the wild banteng.
The Bos javanicus.
Thank you. Which potentially from a domestication event from about 3,500 years ago. So the Bali cattle are found in Southeast Asia, and like the other domesticated bovines we've kind of talked about this episode, they are actually used mostly for plowing rice paddies as well as for their meat. And in addition, they're known for being particularly resistant to most diseases and have very high fertility rates. So they are very hardy domesticated animal to have around. And you can understand why people domesticate these animals. And I believe they do sometimes crossbreed them with other bovine. But for the most part, I believe the Bali cattle are just doing their thing, being themselves. Being
hardy animals.
Hardy animals. Shout out to hardy animals everywhere around the world.
Hashtag hardy animal.
Hashtag hardy animals. Hashtag chunky toes.
Yeah. And our last bovine for the day is the Gayal, Bos frontalis. Just, yeah, another type of ox. I mean, like, clearly, again, another takeaway of today. So, to repeat after me. So, 1, pandas are not tapirs, and number 2 is there a surprising amount of diversity of bovids in Asia, which actually surprises no one, probably. But yeah, the Gayal are also known as the drunk ox, and are found in southern and eastern Asia. So the Gayal are considered to be only semi-domesticated, so like think reindeer. So I guess more of a managed species, but they still sort of have a very significant cultural and economical importance among many ethnic groups in India. Sorry, because even though he's been silent for the entire episode, our producer Tristan is very much still here and thinks it's great to distract us with jokes on the chat of a recording software. But yes, going back to the Gayal, I was talking about its significant sort of cultural and economic importance among many ethnic groups in India. So that includes the Naga and the Adi. And the Gayal is often seen as a symbol of social status and is used ritually as sacrifices. Originally, I should have already mentioned that at the beginning, that it originates from the wild gaur, also known as the Indian bison, so Bison gaurus.
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, the reason why that was at the end of that note is because there's been a lot of debate as to the domestication status of the Gayal. And again, another running theme is that looking at genetics is really hard and still very much a difficult thing. So a lot of these species we've been talking about, it's only been in the last, say, decade or so that we've really gotten an understanding as to where they may have been domesticated from. And I think one of the issues is that, you know, as we were saying, there's so many different species of bovids in Asia. There's a potentiality to kind of crossbreeding and things like that. So you could, you know, without genetics, make arguments for some kind of similar lineage among a lot of these bovids. But yeah, we are making progress in that area, I guess.
Yeah, I think like we have a new hashtag here looking at the Gayal. Chunky horns.
They are chunky horns.
It's got real chunky horns.
I think that's actually one of the things that I was really interested in when we were doing this episode is that even though we have done, let's see, 4 different kind of cattle species for this part of the episode, they're all very different looking. I mean, they all do, if you looked at them, you would say, oh, that's like a cow, right? But they are very distinctively different from each other, which is kind of cool to see. I mean, Asia is a massive continent. It's obviously going to have a lot of biodiversity there. But I think when we're kind of grouping them into these groups of, you know, domesticates, and even though at the end of the day, these species are more or less used, or at least, you know, bred for very similar purposes, whether it's to do being pack animals, doing plowing, being used for secondary products, they're still themselves very different and very diverse.
Well, because I guess also in a way they're not all cattle, strictly speaking.
Oh, yeah, of course.
They're not. Some don't even, well, most don't even belong to the genus Bos. I believe it's just the valley cattle that does. And in fact, it is the animal that most resembles sort of your stereotypical sort of cattle. Even though they seem to have horns a little bit all over the place, there seems to be a lot of individual variation on the shape of the horns, because they tend to be quite small, but some are facing down, some are facing up, and some go backwards like a goat, which is very interesting to see on a cattle-like animal. But yes, I mean, the majority of them are not really cattle per se. They are just, big bovids.
Big boys. Big bovid boys.
Big chunky boys.
Hashtag. Well, I think the moment we start making up hashtags, I think it's time to take a break for a bit. And we'll come back with, as we said before, the part of the show that only us think is the best part of the show. But whatever, what we say goes. We will see you after this break for the case studies.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Baker's, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Baker's worth it every time. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit a million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
And we are back with Archaeo Animals, the podcast all about zooarchaeology. We are doing our episode on the zooarchaeology of Asia as part of our Where in the World miniseries, where we've been looking at the zooarchaeology of various regions and continents throughout the world, because God knows that we need to stop talking about Britain all the time. It's been interesting, though. I can't lie. It's a good way to get us out of our shell and talking about different species and just all different types of things that we wouldn't really be talking about if we stuck to our expertise.
Oh, absolutely.
So yeah, we are at the case studies, as always, the parts that we will just demand that people make it their favorite part of the episode. I don't know why we started doing that, to be completely honest.
Maybe because it's our favorite, really.
I mean, yeah, I always see it as the part of the episode where everything comes together. Because we usually spend the first two parts talking about very specific technical things, and the case studies lets us bring everything together, the contextual stuff, and the history of the actual excavation sometimes, or we just kind of have a laugh.
Yeah, because that's the thing, because in a way, like, it really depends from episode to episode, but it tends to be sort of a more, not quite practical approach, but like depending on how sort of in-depth, how much time we have to go sort of more in-depth, you see the actual sort of zooarchaeology being uncovered on site, and so the interpretation of the evidence found on site, and not just sort of the notionistic sort of discussion about like various domesticates and wild species and their relevance.
Yeah, I think it's like the first two parts of the episodes we're talking about, what we know about the species, the kind of knowledge that already exists. And then the case studies are just examples of applying that knowledge, perhaps.
Yeah, on an archaeological site. Yeah.
Yeah, as one tends to do in these situations.
In the field, that is archaeology.
Yes, yeah. Well,
we'll start off with a nice Bronze Age site. So it's the Zooarchaeology of Harappa, Pakistan. Mm-hmm. So as I said, it's a Bronze Age site located in Punjab, Pakistan, and is part of the broader Indus Valley civilization. The site itself was an elaborate city and an important part of the Indus Valley trade routes, eventually becoming a major center for culture and economy. During urbanization, inhabitants likely utilized animal husbandry as part of their subsistence strategy, supplemented through fishing and like various other marine resources. Ivory was commonly found as raw material on site, implying an abundance of elephant remains or elephants as a resource, either in or around site, so in that general area. Similarly, there have been many elephant skeletal remains and elephant iconography in Harappan contexts. Some have argued that this could indicate not only the cultural significance of the elephant, but potentially evidence of early elephant taming and management. Now, arguably, the most famous set of artifacts coming out of Harappa are the animal seals, which we could argue are important to zooarchaeological understandings of the past. So, like, real animals, so to speak, found on these seals included bulls, bison, elephants, tigers, and also mythical creatures, including a unicorn, or like a bovine creature with one horn. Get horned hybrid creatures, including tigers and elephants, three-headed bovines, and human-animal hybrid creatures, because we always love one of those, like the human-animal things. The latter may actually be depictions of mythological stories that have since been lost to time. Again, going back at what we were discussing a couple segments ago.
Yeah.
About like what sort of remains we find now or certain iconography, how many of these are actually part of sort of stories and traditions that are so like far removed into the past that we don't really know what they represent anymore.
Yeah.
In terms of like non-mammalian sort of depictions on these seals, you do find birds as well, including what some have believed to have been chickens, which again, as in turn being used as evidence towards potentially early domestication of the chicken here. But again, that is debatable because we don't necessarily have the corresponding sort of skeletal evidence to corroborate that theory.
Yeah, and I guess it is hard because you're basing it on iconography, and especially a lot of these sites, iconography can be so stylistic and so artistic, removed from a realistic portrayal that it can be tricky. But I do like, and I don't think we get to really do this, maybe in episodes like this when we're talking about a very specific culture or region, but I don't think we really get a chance to kind of chat about zooarchaeological adjacent things, so artifacts that are depictions of animals that aren't necessarily animal remains themselves, because even if they aren't, osteological remains, it's not something that you could really do zooarchaeological analysis the way that we talk about it too. It is important to the way we look at animals, because obviously zooarchaeology isn't just animals that are being bred or eaten or hunted. It's also the animals that we, think about. Was it good to think with is the phrase for animals, but it's important to kind of think about how artistically we depict animals and how we depict animals in our stories and culturally, because that affects what we do to the animals that we actually interact with.
Because also in a way, like it adds another piece of the puzzle. Because yes, you get the sort of the more sort of scientific side of things with the skeletal elements and the analysis sort of your assemblage on site. But at the end of the day, sort of what we do, what I like to think, is that we're not just looking at necessarily as substance and primary or secondary products, but we're trying to reconstruct human-animal relationships in the past. In a way, the depictions of those animals and the way they're depicted also contributes to what the relationship was there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, to use maybe a more modern depiction, but it's the one I think about whenever talking to people and telling them why it's important we look at not only animal bones, but also the way animals are used and how at least we can interpret animal use in more artistic things, is say Jaws, the film, which, really put a dent in the way general public viewed sharks. Obviously, people are always probably afraid of sharks, but that kind of shark mania really intensified after that film came out. And, it's something that you could arguably see even in the deep past, if there was folklore about a certain species that put it in a very negative light that affects the way people see that species and how they interact with it, and obviously vice versa. So here in Harappa, we have so much evidence of potentially elephant, even if it wasn't, early elephant taming or management, still elephant use in ivory and things like that. And that gets reflected in the iconography, the fact that iconography becomes very prevalent in Harappan contexts and cultures. Obviously, it was used so much in everyday life that it gets kind of juxtaposed. No, that's not the word. It gets applied really to the way people think about it artistically. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I guess like going back to the bird depiction, so it looks like chicken. I mean, I guess also, yes, it could be an early representation of a chicken, but I wonder, like the wild ancestor of the chicken, like the jungle fowl.
Yeah.
It doesn't look too dissimilar from a standard chicken.
Yeah.
Not terribly so.
I think that was part of the reasoning as to why people were using it as potential evidence of early chickens there. But again, a bit with stylistic depictions, it can be very, very tricky. But who knows, if we, the real debate against that is that there really isn't any corresponding skeletal evidence. So there could be someday, but definitely interesting to think about.
There's like all sorts of variables, because then what if the remains didn't preserve for one reason or another, or they were disposed somewhere far away from the settlement? It's one of those things.
It's the underlying anxieties of archaeology that will always remain throughout time until we get time machines. Like as good as our skills and our technology gets, we will always have that tiny smidge of maybe we're missing something. But I kind of like that. I kind of like having that. Maybe it's because it gives me a slight out for being wrong sometimes, if not all the time. But
it's because we've not found it yet.
No, we didn't find it yet. It's fine. It's fine. I'm fine. Anyway, from this very deep conversation we just had, we will be going to our next case study, which is the Zooarchaeology of Yinshu. So Yinshu is a word that actually refers to the ruins of the city of Yin, which is located in the Henan province of China. And it was likely an important capital during the Shang dynasty. I believe even in the terminology, Yin is often associated with the word Shang. So there was definitely association there. So it was most likely an important capital around that time. So Yinshu is arguably most notable for the many, many oracle bones that have been recovered from the site. And I've realized that I think this is the first time we're talking about oracle bones, which I love oracle bones, so that's surprising.
I think we may have mentioned it in a very, very early episode. I've got a very faint recollection.
Probably about ritual.
Actually, yes, very likely, most definitely.
It's because it's like the thing I would think about immediately, despite the biases, I guess, about me being Chinese. So oracle bones are also referred to, at least in Chinese traditional medicine, as longgu, or dragon bones. They are often made from either ox scapula or turtle pastern, which is the underside of the turtle shell. And they're usually made from fragments of those kind of bones, and they will get questions carved into them that also have been known to represent some of the earliest Chinese script that we have, which is also extremely interesting. And just to get a bit more nerdy about it, if you look at what early Chinese script looks like, you can pinpoint the kind of similarities between it and more modern Chinese script in terms of the way that the characters have been kind of transformed and modernized. And I think it's one of the only easy things about learning Chinese. So I learned Chinese a bit late in life, and I still struggle with reading Chinese, but there's certain characters that you can see they come from the early kind of characters, and you can kind of tell what they're trying to display, like a field being kind of a square and things like that. So it's really interesting to see the kind of transformation and yet the retaining of kind of traditional things in that. Anyway, so you would get a ox scapulae or a turtle pastern. You would scrape off the meat from the bone. You would then polish and smooth the surface as best as possible. And then you would drill little pits or holes into the surface. And then you would start to carve in your questions. You would usually carve in a kind of like a dedication or something, depending on, who and where you were getting this done. Then you would kind of carve in the question you were asking. And then you would have a heat source, so like a poker or a piece of wood with like fire on it. You would insert it into one of the pits or holes that were made until the bone itself cracked. And then you would take these cracks and you would interpret them. I don't know if we really have great understanding of how the cracks were specifically interpreted, but it's extremely interesting. And that kind of fortune telling is very prevalent still in a lot of modern day Chinese culture. And another really important part of Yinshu is the tomb of Fu Hao, also known as Fu Hao Mu. It's interpreted as the burial place of Fu Hao, who was not only the wife of Shang ruler Wu Ding, but also a military general in her own right, which is extremely cool. And along with various bronze artifacts, including loads and loads of weapons, which I think is part of the reason why that interpretation came to pass, there were the remains of 15 human attendants, and 6 dogs were also buried there, and they were all likely sacrificed at burial. And it should also be noted that this tomb was excavated by the person who many refer to as the First Lady of Chinese archaeology herself, Zhong Zhenshao. So, yay, trailblazers. A lot of feminism in that case study.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's embarrassingly know little about ancient Chinese tombs and burial and funerary archaeology. So I was very happy to also kind of put that into this case study as well as the oracle bones, because I just love to have an excuse to talk about oracle bones.
Yeah, I think we might have mentioned the ritual episode.
That makes sense. I think it's, obviously many other cultures have used bones to do divination and things like that. It's particularly taking fragments and doing,
Because is it technically
whatever.
called, is it pyromancy?
Yeah, this is technically pyromancy because what you're interpreting is the fire cracking, which is also, I guess, interesting from a taphonomic perspective, because obviously you would have evidence of slight burning, direct burning, really, on a lot of these bones.
Yeah, because they'll give you information about the temperature they were heated at as well, because were they charred, were they calcined, bit of both.
Yeah, I mean, actually, realistically, the oracle bones are like a treasure trove of taphonomic characteristics between, obviously, the fire element, but also the actual preparation, the fact that oracle bones are often having to be scraped and then polished and smoothed and having the actual pits made as well. It's a very intricate, particularly, they are obviously using much hardier bone, like ox scapulae, which is pretty hardy, but it's a lot of kind of intense
processing. Yeah, but I guess you would reconstruct that through the taphonomic evidence that you have. So you'll know the flesh would be removed. One, because you might find sort of slicing or cut marks on the bone to take the flesh off, but also in the way that it burns. Because, of course, if you put a meat-bearing element on the fire, so say, your stereotypical, you see your cartoon sort of joint to bone with a little bit of the cartoon femur sticking out. Just picture that for a moment. Obviously, like the bone that sticks out is going to char, while the bit that's bearing the meat is not going to be as heat affected because it's cushioned by all that flesh all around.
Yeah.
So, of course, if the heat gets distributed sort of roughly evenly, like it's safe to say that there was no meat attached to that bone.
Mm-hmm.
And I forgot about the polishing. Yeah, with some polishing in there as well.
Well, yeah, you gotta polish. You gotta make it nice if you're gonna use it for divination purposes, obviously. But I guess it's fitting, though, that we end this episode on some ritual, because it's one of our favorite things to talk about. And yeah, I think that's it for us. As usual, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You can listen to our backlog at archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Also, think about becoming a member. Help support all the podcast shows there, as well as ourselves. Get some bonus content, maybe a ASMR Zooarchaeology episode down the way. If you want to hear some bones getting shattered or something, we'll think about it. Maybe just, become a member and you'll see. You can find us on Twitter at ArchaeoAnimals, and tell your friends to listen, subscribe, follow, all that other fun stuff, and leave a review, because I like to be validated. I need to be validated. So yeah,
Validate me!
Validate me. All right. Well, as always, I'm Alex Fitzpatrick.
Simona Falanga.
And we will see you next time for our next episode. That sounded like I was saying something more exciting, but oh well. It's fine. We'll have another episode. It's fine. See you later.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Archaeoanimals. Please subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you get your podcast from. You can find us on Twitter at Archaeoanimals. Also, the views expressed on the podcast are those of ourselves, the hosts and guests, and do not necessarily represent those of our institution, employers, and the Archaeology Podcast Network. Thanks for listening.
This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.